The young soldier lay in the mud of a French field, a hole torn through his chest, blood soaking the earth beneath him. His eyes were glassy. His breathing came in short, wet gasps. His skin had turned the color of old paper. Any doctor from 20 years before would have looked at this boy and known the truth. He was already dead. There was nothing to do but hold his hand and wait. But the medic kneeling beside him in 1944 did not wait. He did not pray. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small bottle filled with golden liquid. He found a vein. He squeezed. And in the minutes that followed, something happened that would have seemed like magic to every army doctor who had ever lived before that moment. The dying boy's color returned. His breathing steadied. His heart kept beating. If you had been shot on a battlefield before World War II, you had roughly a coin flip chance of dying from that wound. By 1945, 9 out of 10 wounded American soldiers lived. How did doctors go from watching helplessly as young men bled to death in the dirt to saving almost everyone who reached their hands? And here is the question that should make you stop and think. What would you give to know that if something terrible happened to you, someone had already figured out exactly how to keep you alive? The answer to that question lies in one of the most remarkable stories in all of human history. It is the story of how American military medicine transformed from a practice of quiet despair into a science of near-miraculous rescue. It is a story of blood and bottles, of mold and metal, of ordinary people who refused to accept that death was the natural end of every wound. To understand how shocking the survival rates of World War II really were, you must first understand what came before. You must travel back to a time when getting hurt in battle meant something very different than it does today. In the American Civil War, 80 years before the beaches of Normandy, a bullet wound to the arm or leg usually meant one thing: amputation. There were no antibiotics. There was no way to stop infection once it started. Surgeons sawed off limbs by candlelight while soldiers screamed and bit down on leather straps. The piles of arms and legs outside field hospitals grew so high that men had to dig trenches to bury them. Even then, even after losing a limb, soldiers often died anyway. Infection crept through their blood like poison. Fever took them. Their bodies turned septic. Roughly 14 out of every 100 wounded Civil War soldiers died from their injuries. Many more died later from infections that doctors had no power to stop. Move forward to World War I. The trenches, the machine guns, the gas. Medicine had improved, but not by much. If a soldier was shot in the belly, there was almost nothing anyone could do. If he lost too much blood, he would simply fade away. Doctors watched young men die from wounds that were not even that serious. The problem was not the wound itself. The problem was everything that happened after: blood loss, infection, shock. These three killers claimed more lives than bullets ever did. Roughly 8 out of every 100 wounded soldiers in World War I died. Doctors were better, but they were still fighting with their hands tied. They did not have the tools they needed. They did not understand enough about the human body. They knew soldiers were dying, and they knew roughly why, but they could not stop it. Then came the years between the wars, and in those quiet years, something extraordinary began to happen. Scientists and doctors started solving the problems that had haunted military medicine for centuries. They did not know another great war was coming. They were simply curious people asking questions. What exactly is blood? Can we store it? Can we move it from one person to another? What causes infection? Can we kill the tiny creatures that make wounds go bad? These questions, asked in laboratories far from any battlefield, would end up saving millions of lives. The first breakthrough was blood. For all of human history, blood loss had been a death sentence. If a soldier bled too much, there was nothing to be done. His heart would slow. His brain would fade. He would die. Doctors knew that blood from one person could sometimes be given to another, but the process was difficult and dangerous. Blood spoiled quickly. It could not be stored. It had to be given immediately, from one living person directly to another. On a battlefield, where thousands were bleeding at once, this was nearly impossible. Then doctors discovered something remarkable. They learned that blood could be separated. The red cells could be removed, leaving behind a golden liquid called plasma. And this plasma could do something almost miraculous. It could be dried into powder. It could be stored for months. It could be shipped across oceans. And when mixed with clean water, it could be put back into a dying soldier's veins. It could not carry oxygen like whole blood, but it could do something just as important. It could fill the empty spaces in a soldier's body. It could keep his heart pumping. It could keep his brain alive. It could buy time. By the time America entered World War II, the country had built an entire system for collecting, processing, and shipping blood plasma. Factories ran day and night, turning donated blood into dried powder. Millions of Americans rolled up their sleeves and gave their blood freely. They knew that somewhere across the ocean, a boy they would never meet might live because of what flowed from their veins. The bottles of plasma were packed into medical kits and sent to every corner of the war. Medics carried them onto beaches under machine gun fire. Surgeons used them in tents that shook from nearby explosions. The golden liquid became the difference between life and death for hundreds of thousands of wounded men. But plasma was only part of the answer. Blood loss was one killer. Infection was another. And for infection, doctors had discovered something even more remarkable. They had found a medicine that could kill bacteria without killing the patient. They had found the first true antibiotic. The story begins with mold. A scientist named Alexander Fleming noticed something strange growing in his laboratory in 1928. A kind of mold had contaminated one of his experiments. But around the mold, something curious was happening. The bacteria he was growing had died. The mold was killing them. Fleming realized he had stumbled onto something important, but he did not fully understand what he had found. It took more than a decade for other scientists to figure out how to turn that mold into medicine. They called it penicillin. By 1944, American factories were producing penicillin by the ton. It was shipped to every hospital, every aid station, every medical unit in the war. Wounds that would have turned gangrenous and killed soldiers in every previous war were now treated with a simple injection. The bacteria died. The wounds healed. Men who would have rotted from the inside out walked away with nothing but scars. The wonder drug, they called it. The miracle medicine. But it was not a miracle. It was science. It was the result of curious people asking questions and refusing to accept that infection had to mean death. There was another medicine too, one that came before penicillin and saved countless lives in its own right: sulfa drugs. These were the first antibiotics, discovered in the 1932 and rushed into production before penicillin was ready. Every American soldier carried a small packet of sulfa powder. When they were wounded, they were trained to pour the powder directly into the wound. It killed bacteria on contact. It bought time until the soldier could reach a hospital. Those little packets of white powder prevented infections from ever starting. They turned wounds that would have been death sentences into injuries that could heal. But having the right medicine meant nothing if you could not get it to the wounded in time. And this is where American military medicine made perhaps its greatest leap forward. They built a system, a chain of survival that stretched from the front lines all the way back to hospitals in England and America. Every link in that chain was designed to do one thing: keep the wounded alive long enough to reach the next link. It started with the medics. These were ordinary soldiers who had been trained in first aid. They carried no weapons into battle. Instead, they carried bandages, morphine, plasma, and sulfa powder. When a soldier fell, the medic ran to him, often under fire. Often while bullets kicked up dirt around them, the medics stopped the bleeding. They gave morphine for pain. They dusted wounds with sulfa powder. They started plasma if the soldier was in shock. They did everything they could to stabilize the wounded man, to keep his heart beating, to keep his brain working, until he could be moved. Think about what that meant. Think about what it took. A young man, barely out of his teens, running toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it, kneeling in mud and blood while the world exploded around him, trying to remember his training while his hands shook and his heart pounded, finding a vein in a dying man's arm while machine guns rattled overhead. Would you have the courage to do what those medics did? Would you be able to focus, to think clearly, to save a life while your own life hung by a thread? Once the medics had done their work, the wounded were moved. Stretcher bearers carried them back from the front lines. Jeeps and ambulances rushed them to aid stations. At each stop, doctors and nurses did more work. They closed wounds. They gave more plasma. They gave more medicine. They made decisions about who needed surgery immediately and who could wait. The wounded kept moving, always backward, away from the fighting, toward the hospitals that could save them. The evacuation system was a marvel of organization. Every step was planned. Every minute counted. Doctors knew that the faster a wounded man reached surgery, the better his chances. They called it the golden hour. If you could get a seriously wounded soldier to a surgeon within an hour of his injury, his chances of survival went up dramatically. The entire system was built around that idea. Speed, efficiency, no wasted time, no unnecessary delays. And when the wounded reached the hospitals, they found something else that had never existed before. Teams of specialists working together, surgeons who had practiced the same operations hundreds of times, nurses who knew exactly what to do without being told, equipment that was standardized and ready, techniques that had been refined through years of research. The hospitals were not perfect, but they were extraordinary. They were the best that human medicine had ever created. The numbers tell the story. In the Civil War, roughly 14% of wounded soldiers died. In World War I, roughly 8% died. In World War II, that number dropped to just 4.5%. More than 95% of American soldiers who were wounded in World War II and who reached medical treatment survived their injuries. This was not a small improvement. This was a revolution. This was a complete transformation of what it meant to be hurt in war. And the impact went far beyond the battlefield. The techniques developed during World War II changed medicine forever. Blood banks became standard in civilian hospitals. Antibiotics saved millions of lives from ordinary infections. Surgical techniques developed to treat war wounds were adapted to treat car accident victims, heart attack patients, cancer patients. The emergency medical systems that exist in every city today, with ambulances rushing to accidents and heart attacks, with paramedics trained to save lives before patients reach the hospital. All of this traces back to what American military medicine learned during World War II. There are stories within this story that deserve to be remembered. Stories of individual courage and sacrifice that make the statistics real. There was the medic who ran into a burning building to pull out wounded soldiers and went back again and again until the building collapsed. There was the nurse who worked for 72 hours straight during a major battle, refusing to sleep while there were wounded men who needed her. There was the surgeon who operated in a tent so close to the front lines that shrapnel tore through the canvas while his hands were inside a soldier's chest. He finished the surgery. The soldier lived. There was the blood donor program that collected 13 million pints of blood during the war. Ordinary Americans, housewives and factory workers and teachers and farmers who understood that their blood could save the life of someone they would never know. There was the scientist who worked himself to exhaustion trying to increase penicillin production, knowing that every day of delay meant more soldiers dying from infections that could have been cured. There was the pilot who flew wounded men from Pacific Islands to hospitals in Hawaii, hour after hour, his plane sometimes landing with bullet holes in the wings. These were ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They were not special. They were not superhuman. They were simply people who saw a problem and refused to accept it. They saw young men dying, and they asked themselves what they could do to stop it. And then they did it. They gave their blood. They worked longer hours. They ran toward danger instead of away from it. They solved problems that had seemed unsolvable for centuries. What does this story teach us? Perhaps it teaches us that progress is possible, that the things which seem inevitable, the suffering which seems built into the nature of the world, can be changed by human effort and human intelligence. For all of history, Soldiers had died from their wounds. It seemed like a law of nature. It seemed like the price of war that could never be avoided. But it was not a law of nature. It was a problem to be solved. And when enough people decided to solve it, when enough resources were devoted to finding answers, the answers came. Perhaps it also teaches us something about what ordinary people can do when they work together toward a common goal. No single person could have achieved what American military medicine achieved in World War II. It took scientists and soldiers, doctors and donors, nurses and factory workers, pilots and stretcher bearers. It took millions of people each doing their small part. And when all those small parts came together, they created something that had never existed before. They created a system that could look at a dying boy in a muddy field and say, "No, not today. Today you live." The young men who survived their wounds in World War II went on to live full lives. They came home, they married, they had children and grandchildren. They built businesses and wrote books and taught in schools. They grew old in ways that would have been impossible for wounded soldiers in any previous war. And most of them never forgot. They never forgot the medic who found them bleeding in the dirt. They never forgot the nurse who held their hand after surgery. They never forgot the moment when they realized they were going to live. There is one more thing to remember. The survival rate was 90%, but that means 10% did not survive. That means hundreds of thousands of young men died despite everything that medicine could do. Every death was a tragedy. Every death represented a family destroyed, a future erased, a life that could have been. The soldiers who died were not less important than the ones who lived. They were simply less lucky. The bullet hit a vital organ. The medic could not reach them in time. The infection spread too fast. Medicine in World War II was a miracle, but it was not perfect. It could not save everyone. And perhaps that is the final lesson. We should celebrate the progress. We should honor the people who made it possible. But we should never stop trying to do better. The scientists and doctors of that era did not accept that death was inevitable. They pushed forward. They found new answers. And because they did, millions of people are alive today who would otherwise have died. We owe it to them, and to all those who did not survive, to keep pushing, to keep asking questions, to keep refusing to accept suffering as the natural order of things. These forgotten stories of courage and discovery are the true treasures of history. They remind us what human beings can accomplish when they refuse to give up. They show us that the impossible is often just the not yet possible. And they deserve to be remembered, passed down, shared with those who might never otherwise know that such remarkable things happened. If this story moved you, if it made you see history in a new way, consider joining us in preserving these forgotten chapters of our past. A simple click helps ensure that more people will hear these stories, that the sacrifices made by those medics and nurses and donors and scientists will not be forgotten. There is so much more to discover, so many more stories waiting to be told. What part of this story will you remember longest? Was it the medic running through gunfire? The golden plasma that brought dying men back to life? Or was it simply the realization that ordinary people working together changed what seemed unchangeable? Tell me in the comments. I want to know which moment stayed with you.